Okay, so talking about Purim, talking about Rabbi Moshe Almosnino. Rabbi Moshe Almosnino was from the 16th century. What's interesting about Rabbi Moshe Almosnino is as follows. He was not born in Spain. He was from the generation of Sephardi Chachamim whose parents were from Gerush Sefarad, but he was from the generation of Chachamim that were born outside of Spain. And he was actually born in Saloniki in 1515. Now, so he was from that community of Jews that even though they were not born in Spain, they felt a tremendous attachment to the traditions of Sepharad. They identified with Sepharad and they continued the heritage of the Sepharad of Spain. So in a sense, and you know, when the Jews left Spain, they left many different communities. They left Barcelona, they left Castilla, they left Granada, they left Andalusia, Sevilla, and many, many other places. And they went to many places. They went all over the Ottoman Empire, they went to Syria, they went to Egypt, they went to Morocco. So when they left Spain, they went to many communities. But the community that best exemplified Spanish Jewry, that best maintained the traditions of the Sephardi Chachamim, that recreated, in a sense, the life in Spain, that was Saloniki. Saloniki was, of course, in Greece, and they so recreated the golden age of Spain that they even brought with them the divisions and contradictions that were in Spain. So it's a fascinating community. It's a fascinating history. There were many great Chachamim. Whenever I would be with my, I grew up in a house with thousands and thousands of ancient books. And whenever I would take a book out of the library, and, ask my father, and if I happened to have taken a book by one of the Chachamim from Saloniki, this was the greatest Chachamim ever. So my father loved the Chachamim in Saloniki. He considered them to be absolutely top rate. So one of these Chachamim is Rabbi Moshe Almosnino. And I think it's important, we're going to be reading or we're going to be looking at Megillat Esther through one of his Perushim. So that's why we're discussing Rabbi Moshe Almosnino, because I feel like just to say, Rabbi Moshe Almosnino says this, okay, that's nice. But I want to tell you a little about the Chacham, so you learn you learn about him. So first of all, he was a great philosopher. He actually wrote a commentary on the ethics and politics of Aristotle. Aristotle, as you know, was one of the greatest philosophers. So Rabbi Moshe Almosnino wrote a perush on Aristotle's ethics and politics, a type of commentary. It was called Pene Moshe. It was called Pene Moshe. Pene Moshe means the face of Moshe, because his name, of course, is Moshe. He also was one of the great Jewish Parshanim. He wrote a commentary on the Megillot, on the 5 Megillot, Megillat Echa, Megillat Kohelet, Megillat Shir Hashirim, Megillat Esther, and Megillat. So what we're going to be studying in the case of this class is the Perush on Megillat Esther. The name of the book was called Yedei Moshe. So Yedei Moshe is Rabbi Moshe Almosnino's commentary to the book to the Megillot, to the 5 Megillot, and including Megillat Esther. Rabbi Moshe Almosnino was also a great Talmudist. He wrote several books on the Gemara, including a Perush on Pirkei Avot, and I use the Perush on Pirkei Avot quite a lot. My father gave it to me as a gift. So the name of this book is called Pirkei Moshe. So you see that he was a very prolific writer. He was a great thinker. He was a brilliant man. Telling you a little more about Rabbi Moshe Almosnino, in addition to his scholarship and great rabbinic works and philosophical work I mentioned to you, he actually wrote a book on dream interpretation, amazingly and strangely enough, way before Sigmund Freud wrote a book about dream interpretation. Sigmund Freud wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams, which is quite a good book. Having read it, I have to say I enjoyed it very much. I don't subscribe to everything Sigmund Freud said, certainly not. But nevertheless, Rabbi Moshe Almosnino wrote a book called Dreams, Their Origins and Their True Nature. It was not. The book was not written in in English. What I just gave you is the English translation of the title of the book. So and to my knowledge, this is the first book that provides a scientific view of dreams. That's interesting. Rabbi Moshe Almosnino. So you see that our Chachamim were not only great in knowledge of Torah, which of course they were, and they were tops, but they were great scholars. They were great men. They were men of great learning. So there you go. Again, dreams, their origin and true nature. That's Rabbi Moshe Almosnino. Now, in addition to everything I told you about Rabbi Moshe Almosnino, and here's something very interesting. He was a great leader. Let me tell you why I say that he was a great leader. He understood the milieu of the society he lived in. And he wrote a book, and this book he wrote in Spanish. And I will explain to you in a moment why he wrote this book in Spanish. The name of the book was Extremos y Grandezas de Constantinopla. So he writes a book. This is so interesting. He lived in Constantinople. He writes a book describing the greatness of Constantinople, right? It's almost like, how great Constantinople is. And he writes this book in Spanish. And why does he do this? And there's a reason he does it, because he was smart. He wanted to say thank you to the Ottoman Turks for treating the Jews so well. And in the book, he praises the Ottoman Turks for their incredible treatment of Am Yisrael. And he writes the book in Spanish so that the world can become aware of the greatness of the Ottoman Turks. And this way, he's praising the Turkish authorities. He's letting them know how much we appreciate them. And he publicizes the greatness of Turkey to the world. So here you see how he was also a great leader. Now, I have to tell you that, and by the way, I should also say, we're talking about politics now, which is great, because any great Jewish Chacham also has to be a great politician. But let's just divert back to the Chokhmah. So the yeshivot of Saloniki were considered among the greatest Chachamim, among the greatest yeshivot that had the greatest Chachamim of all the Ottoman Empire. People used to come from miles and miles away to study in the yeshivot of Saloniki. People came from Eastern Europe. People came from Italy. And when people would study in the yeshiva in Saloniki, the Chachamim from that yeshiva in turn went all over Europe, and they became appointed rabbis in many of the great cities like Amsterdam, like Venice. So the greatest testament to the success of the educational endeavors of the Jews of Saloniki is that there was literally no illiteracy. There was no illiteracy in Saloniki among the Jewish population. That's incredible. So continuing now to the political endeavors of Rabbi Moshe Almosnino. So Rabbi Moshe special people. And because we are a special people, we deserve special privileges. So in 1556, Rabbi Moshe Almosnino goes to Suleiman the Magnificent, the leader of the Ottoman Empire. And he wasn't just the leader of the Ottoman Empire, he was the absolute monarch of the Ottoman Empire. Whatever he says goes. And here you see the special place of the Chachamim, because our Chachamim were
Is the rabbi breaking up?
Yeah, for me also, yeah.
Give me a moment. I'm going to switch my Wi-Fi. I'm sorry about that. Give me a moment.
Mikey, continue in the meantime. Very funny. Yeah, clown.
Okay. I'm switching Wi-Fi. If you get disconnected, just we will reconnect you. Okay, I'm switching now.
Dum 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 dum.
Okay, is that better? I think that should be better.
You're with us, great.
Okay, so a lot of technical issues today, but I guess when the pandemic ends, we will be able to do this face to face. I'm sorry about the difficulties today, uncharacteristic. So we will live with it. Okay, so as I said, the Moshe Almosnino was he approached Suleiman the Magnificent. He realized that the Jewish people need special privileges, and he told Suleiman the Magnificent the following thing: "We are a nation. We are constituted as a nation before we got to Turkey, and we would like you, the Ottoman Empire, to give us a special national status, semi-independent status, where we would be organized under the laws of the Torah and not under the laws of the Ottoman Empire." And it was given. This was given. The Jewish community in Saloniki had the special status. We were considered a special national entity. This was a tremendous accomplishment, and for this reason, we were known as the Jewish Republic of Saloniki. My father was one of the first people who pointed out, and he used to talk about this all the time, that until World War I, the port of Saloniki, which was a place of great commerce, was actually closed on Shabbat until World War I. So we really did have the status of a republic. We were independent. We had our own educational institutions. We had our own commercial institutions, and other communities also understood. The Jewish communities took this as a model, and they understood that we are a kingdom in exile with our own sets of law. For those of you who were in my class last week or saw it on YouTube, you know what I discussed when I discussed the Berit, when I discussed the covenant. I emphasized the national aspect of the Jewish people. We're not just a religion, we are a nation under God. That's important. So this idea of us being in exile doesn't mean we give up our national dimension. Now, when Napoleon granted citizenship to the Jewish people, the first movement of Jews to organize the citizenship were the Sephardic Jews. The Sephardic Jews did not want this because they understood that if we accept the emancipation, the freedom that Napoleon was going to give us, we also understood that we would lose our special status as a Jewish republic. I guess one last point about that. You all heard of Baruch Spinoza, the Kofer, the Min, wrote books in which he is Kofen in many of the principles of Judaism. My father wrote a lot in A Shadow of History against Baruch Spinoza, of course. Nevertheless, Baruch Spinoza was one of the influential philosophers in the Western world. I was a little boy, I think it was the early 1970s. And my father used to buy books. It was like his lifelong, he had an addiction. His addiction was buying books and reading them. So one day he came home with the book. I was a little boy. It was called Baruch Spinoza in Soviet Russia. And the point of the book was to say that among the Russian communists, Marx, of course, was the greatest, and Engels, and then Spinoza. So even our Rishaim had great influence. Now, why am I bringing him? Because Spinoza, he writes a book called The Theological Political Treatise. And in this book, he acknowledges that the Jewish people are a special nation. We have a special political status. So this idea of Rabbi Moshe Almosnino was a brilliant idea. It was a correct idea. And it's an idea that's well worth understanding, because this is what made us continue throughout the Galuyot. Okay, so let's now, so that's a historical back to the Moshe Almosnino. As I said, he wrote a Pirush on Megillat Esther. I want to discuss a little about Megillat Esther. We have about 30 minutes left. So here's the way I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you some historic, now that we spoke about Rabbi Moshe Almosnino, I'm going to switch. I'm going to give you now some historical background about Purim so that you can place it not just in Gentile history, but also in Torah history, right? We need to understand, when did it take place? Once I give you the background about Purim, I'm assuming that would take up probably most of the remaining 33 minutes. Then we will switch to actually giving you some of the ideas that Moshe Almosnino himself had about Purim. Okay, so does anybody have any questions at this point in the class before I switch to the second part of the class? Okay, all right. Can somebody say hello to me to make sure that you're actually hearing what I'm saying and that I'm not
Hello.
talking to myself?
Hey.
You're okay.
We hear you.
Oh, Erev Tov.
Loud and clear.
We're good. Thanks,
Okay,
Rabbi. Thanks for the intro. Good.
good. Okay, that's a good thing. So let me give you some historical background. Okay, let me give you some historical background. The Jewish people, they are exiled. The first Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. Babylonia, under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar, destroys the Beit HaMikdash. We go into exile, and we count 70 years because we know that on the 70th year we are supposed to be redeemed. The problem is that people didn't know when the 70-year period starts from. There was a lot of confusion about that. And after what appears to be the end of the 70-year period, the Jews are despondent. Daniel, one of the leaders of the Jewish community in Babylonia, himself describes how he was confused and how he was upset. What happens is that the king at that time was a Babylonian king called Belshazzar. And when Belshazzar realizes that the 70 years came and passed, and that the Jews were not redeemed, he makes a great party. And in the party, he takes out the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. As you know, as I mentioned, Babylonia destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. Well, when they destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, they took many of the utensils from the Beit HaMikdash, gold and silver utensils, and they hid them away in the storehouse, in the treasure house. When Belshazzar realizes that the 70 years have come and passed and the Jewish people have not been redeemed, he decides to kind of like, hit the person while he's down on the ground. He takes out the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. He makes a great party, and he uses the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash to drink alcoholic beverages. He has prostitutes and concubines and whatever else they have, and they're all drinking and getting drunk. And that was the last night of Belshazzar, because on that night, Cyrus the Great, the Persian Median Empire, or they were not an empire. At this point, they were an alliance. They enter the palace of Belshazzar. They kill Belshazzar. It's nighttime. Belshazzar has a daughter. The daughter is walking around in the dark. She doesn't understand what's happening. And she reaches Cyrus the Great, and she thinks it's her father, and Cyrus the Great does not kill her. She's a little girl, and he decides to raise this little girl in the palace. The name of this little girl is Vashti. So there's your connection to Megillat Esther. So let me give you a little more history. So let's start with Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great destroys the Babylonian Empire. He takes over the Babylonian Empire in the year 539. Now, the years I'm using now, and I want to be very clear about this, the years I'm using now for purpose of this class are the standard years and the accepted years by historians. I am not convinced that these years are entirely correct. I know that Sefer Kabbalah of Rabbi Abraham ibn Daoud, one of the Hachamim, who were a generation or so before Harambam, they have a different set of counting. But just for purposes of giving historical context that you can all understand, I'm going to give you the generally accepted year. So the generally accepted year is, and including if you read a Jewish historian, I mean, if you read one of the Jewish historians as well, like Salo Baron and the other Jewish historians, they will give you these years as well, okay? So getting back to it, Cyrus the Great defeats Belshazzar in the year 539. When he defeats Belshazzar, he does something fantastic. He authorizes the Jewish people to return to Israel and to build the Beit HaMikdash. Why does he do this? It's fascinating. Josephus, a great Jewish historian, he records that the reason Cyrus does this is because in the book of Isaiah, of course, was written many, many centuries before this. Isaiah was a Navi in the days of Hiskiah HaMelech, right? Way before the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, right? And in Isaiah, there is a chapter where he says that one day there will be a king called Cyrus, and this king called Cyrus will redeem my people. Thus says God to Isaiah, and this is what Isaiah records. Josephus says that when Cyrus became aware of this prophecy, he was so touched and overwhelmed that there was a prophet among the Jewish people centuries before he was even born, who mentions his name and who says that he will redeem the Jewish people, that Cyrus decided that he will follow the instructions of God and he will indeed redeem the Jewish people. So he gives them permission to return to Israel and to build the Bet HaMikdash. That's what Cyrus the Great does. The Tanakh, of course, mentions Cyrus the Great. He's known as Melech Koresh. He's mentioned in the book of Daniel. He's mentioned in the book of Divrei HaYamim. The book of Divrei HaYamim starts, the first pasuk of Divrei HaYamim starts with Cyrus the Great allowing the Jewish people to return to Israel to build the Bet HaMikdash.
You mentioned Melech. That's where, like a Mashiach in a way, or is he?
Yeah, he was referred to as the sense of, he's referred to as Meshichi because he, in a sense, the idea was that he was kind of put into power by God to do the will of God. Yes, that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
But he's not Jewish, right?
Right, no, of course, no. He wasn't, he was a Persian.
Right.
He was a Persian. What happened is that the Persians and the Medians, they got together and made this alliance, and that alliance is what destroyed the Babylonian Empire. Okay. Continuing in history, again, I just want to give you the historical context that I personally find fascinating, and I love understanding things clearly. And I think it's important that we understand. Again, I always say this in my classes that Judaism is not a mythology, right? We're not just fairy tales. This is actual history we're talking about, and we should understand it as actual events that took place. So that's why I love history. I love Jewish history, but I love also teaching people the factual accuracy of the stories in the Tanakh. And that's what we're doing here tonight with Megillat Esther. Cyrus the Great dies. He's a king for a couple of decades. His son Cambyses was not like his father. He basically instructs that the Bet HaMikdash, the people building the Bet HaMikdash, they stop building the Bet HaMikdash. Cambyses, one second. Cambyses himself is kind of a loser king. He doesn't really accomplish much of anything. He was kind of a man. I mean, if you read the stories about Cambyses in Herodotus, he really was like a crazy guy. He was some sort of Majnun. He wasn't king for many years. After Cambyses is another weird king known as Pseudo-Smerdis. There's a story about that. He pretended to be the brother of Cambyses. Apparently he wasn't. That's why it's called Pseudo-Smerdis. He also does not allow the Jewish people to build the Bet HaMikdash. And finally, we get to a biblical figure mentioned in the book of Daniel. And this biblical figure is Daryavish, or known otherwise as Darius the Great. Darius the Great, he assassinates Smerdis. He takes over the Persian Median Empire, and he reinstates the policy of Cyrus the Great. He allows the Jewish people to continue building the Bet HaMikdash. For those of you familiar with the story of Daniel, the book of Daniel, Darius the Great was the king who threw Daniel into the lion's den. He did not throw him into the lion's den because he wanted to. He actually loved Daniel. Daniel was one of the three leaders. There was a triumvirate in Persia. Daniel was one of the triumvirate. So he had tremendous power.
Rabbi, we don't hear you.
is the Greek name for a really weird Persian name, which I won't even try to.
Wait. Rabbi Abraham, we lost you a while back. You were
Yes.
saying about the tremendous power and why he didn't want to throw Daniel into the to the lion's den. That's where
Right.
Okay, so let me try to switch to 5G. Okay, so again, I'm going to just get rid of the Wi-Fi and try to do this on 5G. I'm sorry. Give me a moment. Okay. Can you all hear me now?
Hear you okay? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this has been a fun night. Having fun technical issues. Just one moment. All right. So, all right, let's continue. I just managed to print out some material that I wanted to use for this class. That's great. So the last 20 minutes of the class, we will have the opportunity to, I will have the opportunity to use my notes, which is always a good thing. Let me just do this restart here. See if this works. Okay, so getting back to the story of Xerxes. Xerxes is the king after Darius the Great.
I thought you said it's Xerxes.
I heard it pronounced Xerxes, but I could be wrong. You know, I'm not sure. It's a Greek word, so
20 years ago, when we learned the Megillah together, you used the word Xerxes.
it
I
could
have
be.
it inculcated in my mind.
It could be.
What a memory.
I don't deny that. I don't deny it. Recently, when I heard professors talking about this king, I heard them saying Xerxes. Is it
Yeah,
Xerxes?
Xerxes.
By the way, if you remember, you also taught us the Persian way to pronounce it. Should I tell you?
What the Persian way?
Akhsharsha.
Okay,
Do you remember that?
That's interesting.
You said that. Do you remember it?
I don't.
Oh my God.
I don't remember it. I've got to tell you, I don't remember it.
Wow.
So-
Okay.
Go
Wow.
on, Nate.
What does that say about me? Am I off?
Oh, you're right on. That's cool, Nate.
We learned this together in Bet Torah.
Interesting. Honestly, I have no memory whatsoever of having taught it in Bet Torah.
Mechila.
anything.
Okay. Mechila.
Right. Now, I just want to make a side note as long as we're talking about computers and technical issues. So, I was just telling my wife the other day how, the Mac is not what it used to be. 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I first got a Mac, every time you download something, do an update, the whole thing would get screwed up. You couldn't use it. It was terrible. And I was telling her how it's not like that nowadays. Long story short, this morning I got a notice, do an update on the Mac. I do an update on the Mac. And nothing in my Mac is, well, I'm sure it's going to work itself out, but here I am using my phone to try to get this class. So that's just that good stuff to share with you. So let's continue now with the story of with the history of Ahasuerus and the history of Xerxes, because it is actually quite interesting. And what happened is that Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, and just so you know, Xerxes is the Greek name of Ahasuerus. His Greek name was Xerxes. That's a name that Herodotus gives him. So the Persian name, so the Hebrew name Ahasuerus is more similar to the Persian name. So just so you know that. So what happens with Ahasuerus? Ahasuerus, he is appointed king after Darius. When he becomes the king, there is a series of rebellions that take place, and this is very normal. Back then, when you would have a new king in a country or in an empire, you would always have rebellions that take place. There was a rebellion that took place in Egypt. Okay, he sends his army to Egypt, he squells down the rebellion. It takes him about 2 years to squell the rebellion. And then what do you think happens later? This is the beginning of Megillat Esther. How does Megillat Esther start? ויהי בימי אחשוורוש הוא אחשוורוש המולך מהודו ועד כוש 720 מדינה. And then the pasuk continues. בשנת שלוש למלכו. That's the pasuk I was looking for. בשנת שלוש למלכו עשה משתה לכל שריו ועבדיו. Look how the book starts. Everything that's written in the Megillat Esther is 100% accurate. He actually ruled the Persian Empire was from all the way from India in the east, Mehodu, all the way to Ethiopia in the west. They controlled all of Egypt. They controlled much of Asia Minor. They reached the Greek archipelago, and they reached many of the Greek islands, not all of Greece. They reached Macedonia. Parts of Macedonia were already under the rule of the Persian Empire. But as I said, there was a rebellion in Egypt. What do the Hachamim tell us? They tell us that on the third year, Ahasuerus makes a party to celebrate the military victory. And now you see the perfect alignment between what the Megillah says, Bishnat Shalosh Lemelcho, he made this party, and what history teaches us. History actually teaches us that it was on the third year that he finished, it was the second year he finished the military victory against the Egyptians, and it was on the third year, therefore, that he did this party. So you see how perfectly that works? Okay, let me tell you something else. And I think I may finally have my computer working, which would be an amazing contribution to this class. I think, I could be wrong, but give me a moment while I try to multitask, talk about King Xerxes while I do this class. Okay, it might work. All right, so continuing the story of King Xerxes, let me tell you what happened. So he goes back, he has his party. This is the third year of his kingdom. I'm saying these pesukim because I don't have anything in front of me right now. So he makes a party for the army, for all the military leaders, and basically the purpose of this party, as my father used to say in his class, is thank you for a job well done. Okay, what happens? So King Xerxes, he decides, and you're going to see how this really ties in perfectly. You're going to see how perfectly this ties in with the Megillat Esther, what I'm about to tell you now. So King Xerxes, he decides to go and make a war against the Greeks. Let me tell you what happens in that war. He sends his army, and they reach the Greek archipelago. They get to Asia Minor, and soon you're going to hear about a Hollywood movie. Because I don't know if you were aware of this. Some of you may know this, but there was actually a Hollywood movie that describes part of what I'm about to tell you. Okay. If you want to learn more about this, you Google the words the First Persian War. The First Persian War, which is what we're describing now, takes place in the year 481 BCE. He marches across Turkey. He arrives in the city of Sardis, which is in the Greek peninsula. And Herodotus actually says that when Ahasuerus arrived to Sardis, he had a 1,000,000-man army. I think that's an exaggeration. I don't think it was a 1,000,000-man army. It was probably a couple of 100,000, maybe 300,000, 400,000. It seems a bit exaggerated. Don't forget, Herodotus was a Greek, so he was very, he wanted to show how great the Greeks were, that they were able to survive Ahasuerus. Nevertheless, and just one more moment, I'm going to see if I can get the, let me see if I can get this working now. I think my computer may be working. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Give me a moment, please. Okay. This is remarkable. Okay. Hi, everyone. So, okay.
I think there's an echo, sorry. I guess not. Anyone there?
Yeah, okay, 1 second.
Oh.
I'm going to disconnect one device, And when I disconnect that device, you may all get disconnected, in which case I will ask you all to just rejoin, okay? But this will hopefully be the last time this happens.
Okay.
You all there?
Yeah.
Here.
Amazing.
Right
Okay.
here.
Inshallah.
Modern technology is fantastic. It really is. We all spend time on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Instagram. I don't, but I know this is the way of the world. So like if you have to take a course nowadays in college, I have a daughter in college, doing courses, and everything is like so complex. You have to figure out the right format to put the test. You have to download it, upload it, put it on some cloud in Indochina. Then from there, it has to go to another place. It used to be you just write things on a piece of paper and you hand it in, but it's like the world's a much better place nowadays. There's no question about that. It's just so much more efficient. Okay. Getting back to what I actually wanted to say about the First Persian War. So they arrive in Sardis, which is the Persian capital in Asia Minor. They send emissaries to Greece seeking the submission of the Greeks. This is important because now you're going to understand the end of Megillah, how Megillat Esther continues. You're going to see it in a moment. Okay, so just bear with me. The custom back then, just so you know, was that if you send an emissary to a city saying, I want you to submit yourself to the Persian Empire, they would have to give a sample of the earth and some water. And that was their way of saying, you now are the owners of this city. You now are the owners of this land. So they go from city to city, and one city after the other in Asia Minor submits until they get to Athens. And the Athenians will have none of this. They kill the emissaries, they throw them in a well of water, and so ends the First Persian War. And this brings us to the Second Persian War, and there is a great movie about this. I didn't see the movie, but I'm told that it was good. It's called 300. Anybody hear the movie 300? So 300 portrays, it is an actual historical portrayal of Ahasuerus. The reason it is called 300 is because it portrays a particular battle of 300 Spartan soldiers. And there was a battle in a place called Thermopylae. And it is a heroic battle, part of the Second Persian War. What happened? I'll give you like very brief and very rough and dirty summary. Ahasuerus has this big grandstand built for him. He's sitting on the grandstand. He wants to watch the Persian army massacre the Greeks. And day after day, he's coming to the grandstand. He has Coca-Cola, maybe he has Diet Coke, he has popcorn, and he has Cracker Jacks. And he is going to enjoy the Persian army destroying the Athenians, destroying the Spartans. But unfortunately, the battle gets really nasty and ugly. And he realizes that his very life is in danger, and he just returns to Persia. Do you know when this happens, when he returns to Persia? The 7th year of his kingdom. Do you know when the story of Megillat Esther starts? Yeah, we had the party that took place the 3rd year. You know the story where Haman comes to Ahasuerus and that whole incident? The 7th year. Okay. Let's think about that for a second. What's the connection? And it's really remarkable. So imagine this king, this great emperor, he lost to the Greeks. He was humiliated. He returns to Persia. That's not a good situation to be in. Now, the Chachamim and the Gemara say something very interesting. They say, you want to understand Haman and Ahasuerus? Mashal lema hadavar domeh. What is this like? The Gemara says, it's like you have one person who has a field and another person who has a field. One person has a field, he has a big mound in his field. He doesn't know what to do with the giant mound of dirt in his field. And the other person has a big hole in his field, and he doesn't know how he can fill up the hole in the field. So the person with the hole, which is Haman, goes to the person with the mound, which is Ahasuerus, and says, listen, I have a hole in my field. I need dirt to fill it up. You have a mound in your field. You have nothing to do with it. You want to get rid of it. So how about I come to your field, I take the mound, and I fill up the hole in my field. And Ahasuerus says, that's a great idea. Please do it. That's a mashal the Hachamim used to describe the story of Haman coming to Ahasuerus and saying, I want to kill the Jews. How about it? Why is that so important? Okay, because when emperors lose wars, they become very weak in the eyes of the people. And that engenders rebellions against the emperor, who now looks like he's a weakling.
and let's just rebel. So when that's the situation, you need to do something to stay in power. And he has this mound. What is a mound? He has this terrible deformity in his kingdom that he lost to the Greeks, right? And he needs to do something. What better way to do than to blame the Jews? So Haman hates the Jewish people. He has a hole in his field. That hole just represents a raw hatred. The guy is a hater of the Jewish people. Ahasuerus is not a particular fan of the Jewish people. He has another problem. He has a mound in his field. He just lost and he doesn't know what to do with the loss. Haman says, I'll tell you what to do with the loss. Get everybody riled up against the Jewish people. If you get everybody riled up against the Jewish people, you will reunify the kingdom and you will be exerting your power, and everybody will become unified and subservient to you once more. That's why it's so important to understand the historical record, because by understanding the historical record, you can then understand what was taking place in this story. It was the 7th year, exactly when he came back. And now we also understand why it is that Ahasuerus was so paranoid about people trying to kill him, to rebel against him, to overthrow him, why he was paranoid about Queen Esther joining Haman. He was in a weak position, and he really was in a situation where he could be threatened, overthrown, and killed. Okay? And again, if you want to know more about that, you can Google the words the Second Persian War. That's a war where they lost against the Greeks. Or you can perhaps, I don't know anything about the movie. I don't know if it has bad scenes. I'm not going to recommend a Hollywood movie. Sometimes they have bad scenes and I can't just recommend a Hollywood movie. But, the movie 300, assuming it's clean and doesn't have any bad scenes, you can also watch that and get some additional context about the king Ahasuerus. So
The
that's
way
what I
you're
want to
describing, Mechila, the way you're describing the historical background doesn't seem to correlate with the Chachamim or the Megillah, the way it's told.
Go ahead. What
Just,
part?
I mean, the fact that he lost the war and he has a problem and he needs to fix it. I mean, he seems to be very aloof and just going along for the ride. And then he gets persuaded by Esther, to change course. I'm just being superficial about it, but I didn't see it as him trying to solve a problem. Rabbi Avraham?
He didn't like the question.
Okay. I thought we were past the technical difficulties. I think that the mashal that the Chachamim brought about the mound and the hole, I think that mashal tells you everything. I think it tells you that Ahasuerus had a big problem. By the way, I never understood what they meant by that mound. Well, what's the mound? I've never seen an explanation of that. What is that? Right? And I think that tells you he had a serious issue. He had this blemish. It was a blemish on his kingdom. And he had to do something. And I think the history explains what that was.
Okay,
Right?
this better. Yeah, fair.
I really think it explains what that was. Okay, let's see. So we have about 4 minutes. Notice that at the end of the book of Ahasuerus, he goes back to the Greek islands. He goes to Iyayam, and he does wars against them. Here's the thing: the son of Ahasuerus is a Jew. The Jew he was the son of Ahasuerus and therefore he was Jewish, Dariavish, and he allows the Jews to once again start rebuilding the Bet HaMikdash. So so what we see here is that while the Jewish people, on the one hand, they were redeemed under Cyrus the Great, there was a period of time there where the Jews were in a dire situation. And the situation was so dire that after Dariavish, the son of Ahasuerus, was a king called Artaxerxes, or Xerxes, Artaxerxes, And that's the king that Ezra HaSofer comes to and tells him, I need to return to the Jewish people. I need to go to the Jewish people in Jerusalem because the situation there is a terrible situation, right? So while all this is happening in Paras Umadai and all the great celebrations with Mordechai and Esther, the Jewish people in Jerusalem were in a very difficult situation. The Bet HaMikdash was not allowed to be built. Later on, as I said, when Dariavish, the son of Ahasuerus, he let them rebuild it, but it was still a very bad situation. So when Dariavish, the son of Ahasuerus, dies, and Artaxerxes becomes king, that's when Ezra HaSofer comes and he tells him, please let me return to Jerusalem because I want to help the Jewish community there. And Artaxerxes grants him permission. Just to continue the story, because we have another 2 minutes and I want to finish the historical parts of next year. We'll actually, next week, we'll study the actual Megillah. Later on, years later, comes Nehemiah. He also asks the king for permission to go to the Jewish people. He returns to Jerusalem for a limited period of time, and he completes the construction of the city of Jerusalem, the walls of Jerusalem, the Bet HaMikdash. They complete the construction of the Bet HaMikdash. They complete the construction of the walls of Jerusalem. And then finally, you have the last Navi. Does anybody know who the last Navi was? The last Navi was Malachi.
Yes, wait.
Malachi comes around. Malachi, he's in the Trei Asar. Malachi comes towards this period of time. And what is Malachi talking about? He talks about a few things. He talks about the fact that the Jewish people, when they would bring the korbanot in the Bet HaMikdash, they were not bringing the best animals. They were not bringing the best sacrifices. And he says that the Jewish people are in a sense disrespecting God, and they're acting in a poor fashion. And the reason that they are poor, and they were very poor, and the reason that there was tremendous famine is because they weren't acting properly in the Bet HaMikdash. So if you act cheaply with God, God will act cheaply back with you. That was the message of Malachi. And he was telling them, start giving the proper ma'asrot, start bringing proper korbanot, and you will see how if you do this, I will open up the Arubot HaShamayim, I will open up for you the gates of heaven with tremendous wealth and tremendous prosperity. So that's it. The purpose of this class was to give you the historical context. We started with the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash under the Babylonians. We went to the Persian Empire. We went to Cyrus. Then skipping over the two kings in the middle, we got to Dariavish. From Dariavish, we got to Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus was the king who fought the Persian Wars, the first Persian War, the Second Persian War, and then his son Dariavish allows the Jews to once again build the Bet HaMikdash, but things were not going well. Comes Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was the king in the days of Ezra. He gives Ezra, and then he gives Nehemiah later on the permission to return to Jerusalem. They build Jerusalem. They build the Bet HaMikdash. But one last thing, the Jewish people were suffering. They were in poverty. Comes Malachi, he says, you want to leave the poverty? You want to succeed? Start doing proper korbanot. Start giving proper ma'asrot to the Kohanim, to the Leviim, and you will see how Israel will flourish. And that's what happened. Israel became the second Commonwealth flourished. There was tremendous prosperity and there was tremendous success. But of course, that's a subject for another story, another lesson. I just wanted to give you the historical context of the Megillah. So having said that, does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, so I hope that next week we have better technical expertise and better success with the technology.
No problem. Chazak Baruch Rabbi, thank you.
All the best.
Super.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Beautiful.